Miranda Hayes, the iron-willed head of the Briarwood Homeowners Association, slammed her fist on the pine conference table so hard that the overhead light flickered for a moment. She was done with negotiations, she said. No more concessions, no more second chances. Anyone daring to stand in her way would face swift legal action and public humiliation. At least, that was the rumor floating around town, whispered among neighbors who feared the sight of her sleek SUV pulling up to their property. But it wasn't just any rumor. Zachary Pierce, a 33-year-old land surveyor who had inherited his grandfather's modest farm just 2 miles outside the official boundaries of Briarwood, sat across from her in that cramped makeshift office, uncertain whether to call her bluff or retreat. This was no ordinary meeting. It was a confrontation that most men in his position would have avoided. And yet here he was, his boots still muddy from the fields, a scuffed binder of outdated property deeds resting on his lap, hoping to talk sense into a woman known for never backing down. He didn't even live within the fancy neighborhoods her HOA controlled, but that hadn't stopped Miranda from extending her power beyond the usual lines. She claimed that Zachary's farmland fell under a newly expanded eco-development zone the HOA had lobbied for, a zone that granted them oversight to enforce building standards, environmental regulations, and property improvement mandates. Through cunning legal maneuvers, she'd gained the backing of local officials who stood to profit from her expansions. And now, she was forcing Zachary to face the possibility that he could lose everything. Not just the land that had been in his family for generations, but the small wetlands he and his late grandfather had protected for decades. He cleared his throat, forcing calm into his voice while his nerves rattled inside his chest. "I'm asking you politely," he said. "Please remove that fence you erected on the eastern edge of my field. It cuts off my irrigation canal, my livestock can't get water, you had no right to build there." Miranda didn't even blink. "The association has every right, or at least every right that matters," she said, gesturing at a stack of papers in front of her. "We believe your property violates Code Sections 14A and 29C of the new Watershed Directive. You shouldn't be using that canal at all without explicit permission from our environmental board. Of course, if you join the HOA as a paying member, we might waive certain fines and help you file for the correct permits." Her smile was a veneer of professional grace. But Zachary knew the threat underneath was real. His father had warned him about people like her, long before an illness claimed the old man's life. The farmland was more than soil and water rights. It was a legacy. Zachary had grown up trudging through those fields, learning to appreciate the wetlands at the property's edge and how crucial they were for local wildlife. Now, after weeks of receiving official-sounding letters demanding compliance with vague regulations, he was here, in a last-ditch attempt to reason with Miranda personally. The flicker of fluorescent light above them cast her stern face into a sharper angle as she leaned forward. "Let me make this simple," Miranda said, her tone shifting to a cold finality. "We have big plans for Briarwood, and you're in the way. Sign over the parcel by the wetlands for fair market value, allow us to incorporate it into our new development project, or prepare yourself for a protracted legal fight. I have connections at the county assessor's office. I can have your property taxes tripled, your grandfather's existing deeds contested, and your entire operation shut down before you can blink. That fence you're complaining about is the least of your worry." Zachary felt a clenched fist in his gut. This was more than intimidation. It was a declaration of war. "I'm not selling," he said, meeting her gaze with whatever courage he could muster. "And you have no authority to fence my land just because of your so-called expansions. If you push me, I'll get a lawyer and file a complaint." Miranda arched a brow, seemingly amused. "By all means, try. Though I suspect you'll find the local lawyers too busy to take your case once they learn you're up against the HOA. Good day, Mr. Pierce." She raised a manicured hand, signaling that the meeting was over. He left with his binder of documents clutched under his arm, his heart pounding. At the door, he passed an older couple who looked just as nervous as he felt, presumably also summoned by Miranda for some misdeed. He caught snippets of a frantic conversation. "They say we're in arrears. They might garnish our wages if we don't pay the new road upkeep fee." He wanted to warn them, or at least offer a sympathetic word, but he was too unsettled himself. Instead, he strode out into the cool morning air, blinking against the bright sun. He needed a plan. Something, anything that could halt Miranda's relentless push to snuff out his rights. On his way home, he stopped at the local diner for coffee, attempting to settle his nerves. The place was half empty. Small-town folks who recognized him exchanged worried glances. Everyone knew about the HOA creeping beyond its original territory. Everyone whispered about shady deals with the city council, rumors of land grabs, environmental disregard, and developer greed, but no one dared speak too loudly. After all, Miranda had bankrupted more than one family with nuisance lawsuits that dragged on for years. Zachary took a seat at the counter, hoping the friendly waitress might offer a slice of normalcy. Instead, he found himself next to a husky man in a camouflage jacket, reading a flyer for an upcoming shooting competition. The man turned and gave him a nod, noticing Zachary's tension. "You look like you've had a rough one," he said. "The coffee here's not half bad, though." Zachary sighed. "Just got out of a meeting with Miranda Hayes. She's pulling the usual strings. I own farmland outside Briarwood, but she insists she can claim it for her new development." The man grimaced. "She's got the county in her back pocket, from what I've heard. My cousin's place got slapped with so many fines he had to sell." He set the flyer down. "Name's Nick Wallace. I'm an electrician by trade, but I dabble in shooting competitions here and there." Zachary sipped his coffee. He noticed the flyer Nick had been reading. Redwood Range Championship. One of the sponsors listed was the Briarwood HOA. He recognized Miranda's name in bold letters at the bottom. "Tell me something," Zachary said, picking up the flyer. "Why would the HOA sponsor a shooting championship? That's an odd partnership." Nick shrugged. "Money's money, I guess. The Redwood Range is fancy, drawing top competitors from around the region. My guess is they stand to benefit from the HOA's clout, maybe in exchange for promoting developments or building an exclusive clubhouse on some new property. I've heard rumors the top shooter, Carter Cobra, Flynn, is basically the HOA's golden boy. Wealthy sponsors love him." It was a strange synergy indeed. A land-controlling homeowners association, a top-tier shooting event, and an arrogant champion. But as odd as it was, it also gave Zachary a flicker of an idea. He'd heard more than once that Carter Flynn was a brash competitor who loved attention, perhaps even courted by the very officials that Miranda lunched with. If Carter was used as a marketing tool for the HOA, then maybe humiliating Carter might crack open the HOA's armor in the public eye. Of course, the notion was half-formed and ridiculous. Zachary wasn't a competition shooter by any stretch, nor did he have the means to beat a pro. But Nick's mention of Redwood Range sparked a memory. Zachary had once seen a quiet figure practicing at the local farmland co-op, a woman named Ava Rowan, who displayed uncanny marksmanship with a rifle. While mostly overlooked by the usual members, she had left quite an impression on him. Could she be the key? He thanked Nick, left a tip for the waitress, and hurried home to consult the battered trunk of documents and family keepsakes he'd inherited. Inside that trunk, among old photographs and property blueprints, was the phone number of a volunteer environmental group, people his grandfather had worked with. They might help him fight the HOA from a legal or conservation angle, but realistically, that process could take months, even years. And Miranda was moving swiftly, already fencing off land and threatening condemnation. Zachary needed a parallel strategy to raise public awareness or shift the balance of power. He sat at his kitchen table, flipping through the Redwood Range flyer. If only there was a way to get this Carter Cobra Flynn dethroned by someone else. A large sponsor fiasco might reflect poorly on Miranda. That was a pipe dream, though, unless someone had the skill to outshoot a champion on a public stage. Over the next few days, he bounced from one county office to another, trying to file formal complaints about Miranda's unauthorized fence. He was met with red tape, disinterested clerks, or blatant stonewalling. At the zoning office, a woman behind the counter actually snickered when he mentioned fighting the HOA. "Good luck," she said, not bothering to hide her cynicism. "Ms. Hayes basically runs the land development show around here. You'll need a miracle if you want to keep your farmland out of her grasp." By the time he trudged home, frustration had set his nerves on edge. That night, he realized he needed to track down Ava Rowan. It was a long shot, but if she was half as good as rumors suggested, she could enter Redwood Range's big contest, compete against Carter, and maybe cause enough embarrassment to Miranda that the media or local population would pay attention. The only problem was that he hardly knew anything about Ava, just that she occasionally showed up at a public range near the farmland co-op and rarely spoke about herself. The following weekend, he drove over to that range, hoping to spot her. If she didn't appear, he'd have to figure out another plan. He arrived to find the place nearly empty, just a few folks sighting in hunting rifles, a father teaching his teenager how to shoot, and the usual staff member behind the counter. Zachary inquired about Ava. "Haven't seen her in a couple of weeks," the staffer said, shrugging. "She's got some skill for sure, but keeps to herself. Maybe check Redwood Range. I heard she was thinking of going up there for an open practice session." Redwood Range, the same place that Carter Flynn treated like his personal kingdom. Zachary thanked the staffer and left, a mixture of nerves and determination churning in his gut. 2 days later, he mustered his courage to drive to Redwood Range, an imposing facility perched atop a scenic hillside. At the entrance, large wrought iron gates bore the insignia of the range, with neatly manicured hedges and flower beds. Signs announced the upcoming championship, listing Carter Flynn as the star attraction. Zachary parked his old pickup among rows of luxury SUVs and sports cars. It felt like stepping into a different world. Wealthy enthusiasts milled about, chatting about ballistics and brand-name firearms. A smiling hostess approached him. "Are you here for the open practice?" she asked. He nodded, paid the day fee, and was handed a visitor's badge. Then he walked along a row of practice lanes, scanning for Ava. He found her at a far end, quietly adjusting the scope on a well-worn rifle. She wore simple attire, jeans, a gray sweatshirt, nothing that screamed elite shooter, yet her posture was confident. A pair of protective earmuffs dangled around her neck. She fired a test shot at a mid-range target. The bullet landed dead center. Another shot, another bullseye. Despite his tension, Zachary couldn't help but feel a surge of relief at seeing her skill in person. After observing for a minute, he cleared his throat and approached. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Ava Rowan?" She lowered her rifle, turning to face him with a polite but guarded expression. "Yes, that's me. Do I know you?" Zachary gave a small, apologetic grin. "We've crossed paths maybe once or twice at the farmland co-op. I'm Zachary Pierce." She nodded, though no flicker of recognition lit her eyes. "I remember you vaguely," she admitted. "You're the one who manages that farmland near the wetlands, right?" Her voice was calm, measured. He took a breath, wondering how to launch into his plea without sounding crazy. "I have a situation with the Briarwood HOA. Miranda Hayes is trying to seize parts of my property, using legal pressure. You might know that they sponsor Carter Flynn." Ava's gaze flicked to the large banner overhead, showing Carter's smiling face. "I've heard of him," she said. "What does that have to do with me?" Zachary stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Look, it's a stretch, but I've seen you shoot. I came here to see if you'd be willing to compete in the Redwood Championship. Maybe you can beat Carter, cause a public stir. If he falls, it might tarnish Miranda's image. People might start questioning the HOA's tactics." He paused. The plan sounded even more naive when he said it out loud. Ava's eyes registered surprise, followed by a flicker of amusement. "So you want me to humiliate Carter and that'll somehow save your farmland? That's quite an ask." She glanced at the target, then at the crowd. "And what makes you think I'd stand a chance? Carter's a champion with sponsors, specialized equipment, and years of competition experience." Zachary shrugged. Launched off her speech, Marvin spent the rest of the night attempting to save the radio ship. "I just watched you put 3 bullets through the same hole at 100 yards. I figure your skill must be more than enough. This guy is good, sure, but..." He let out a slow breath. "It's not about unstoppable or not. Competitions are complicated. There's pressure, crowd noise, politics. Besides, I'm not exactly a fan of big crowds and showdowns." He recognized reluctance in her eyes, so he tried a different angle. "I understand. But the HOA's chokehold is expanding. They're pushing farmers off their land, ignoring environmental protections, and eventually they'll wreck these wetlands. My grandfather's entire legacy is tied to that place. If we don't get public attention, we'll lose everything. We need a champion who can stand up to Carter in a very visible way." Ava studied him for a beat. You said your farmland is near wetlands? He nodded. Yes, we have a unique ecosystem there. Rare birds, amphibians. Miranda wants to pave it all for a high-end complex. The corners of Ava's mouth tightened. I grew up near a swamp in the Florida Panhandle, she said quietly. My father used to take me out at dawn to watch the sunrise over cypress trees. He said people underestimate nature's beauty until it's gone. She hesitated, glancing around at Redwood Range's manicured lawns. You know, I didn't come here to make waves, but something about this feels personal. All right, I'll think about entering, but no promises. Encouraged, Zachary offered a grateful nod. That's all I can ask. Thank you. As he turned to go, a loud voice boomed from a nearby lane. All spectators clear the bench. Carter's about to demonstrate a precision run. Heads swiveled. A group of affluent onlookers parted to reveal Carter, Cobra Flynn himself, wearing designer shooting glasses and a form-fitting black jacket with sponsor badges. He exuded confidence, and it wasn't hard to see why people fawned over him. His gear alone probably cost more than Zachary's truck. Carter addressed the watchers in a charismatic tone. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to show you the technique that won me last year's tri-state title. Watch and learn. He fired at a long-distance target, racking up near-perfect hits. Applause broke out. When he turned, he caught sight of Ava and Zachary off to the side. His eyes flicked with curiosity, then a hint of condescension. He strode over, rifle slung across his shoulder. You two enjoying the view? Carter asked, smirking. If you're here for tips, the line forms behind those folks. He nodded toward an odd cluster of fans. Ava gave a polite smile, stepping aside as if to leave. But Carter wasn't finished. Wait, you're that local sharpshooter who shows up sometimes, right? Rowan, is it? She nodded. Carter chuckled. I've heard a rumor that you might compete at the Redwood Championship. That should be interesting. For about 5 minutes. Then I'll bury your scores. His tone was playful but laced with arrogance. Zachary clenched his jaw, but Ava's composure never wavered. We'll see, she said softly. Carter raised an eyebrow, glancing at Zachary as if noticing him for the first time. And who's this? Your manager or something? Zachary bristled. Just a friend, he muttered, not wanting to provoke Carter further. Carter gave a lazy shrug. Sure, well, good luck. I'll look forward to the moment they announce second place. With that, he pivoted away to greet a sponsor who had just arrived, leaving behind a faint tension in the air. Ava exhaled, rolling her shoulders. He's got a big mouth, she commented. Zachary bit back a retort, deciding not to feed Carter's ego any more than necessary. Instead, he turned to Ava. I guess you have your official invitation, he said with a half smile. She nodded, gaze drifting back to the target lanes. I'll consider it carefully, she said. If I go through with this, I want to do it right. In the following days, the Redwood Range staff finalized the list of participants for the upcoming championship. Posters went up around town, with Carter's confident grin plastered front and center, the HOA's logo displayed prominently. A modest row of smaller text announced other notable shooters, and, to Zachary's relief, one of those names was Ava Rowan. She had committed to compete. He felt a flicker of optimism. Perhaps, if she performed as he hoped, the local press or the crowd might start asking questions about the HOA's involvement. That might lead to more scrutiny on Miranda's land grab tactics. However, as the competition date neared, Miranda escalated her efforts. Notices appeared on Zachary's fence, citing code violations. An official-sounding letter arrived, threatening to fine him thousands of dollars if he didn't remove certain unauthorized structures that had existed for decades on farmland outside HOA jurisdiction. Meanwhile, neighbors told him that Miranda had begun cornering them, trying to buy up their land cheaply under the threat of similar harassment. The tension in the area was palpable. One late afternoon, after a long day of trying to fix a broken irrigation pump, Zachary returned to his house to find that someone had spray-painted "Sell or Else" on his barn door. The paint was fresh, the letters large and menacing. He felt a surge of anger and fear. Clearly, intimidation was ratcheting up. That night, he double-checked the locks, uncertain who might show up next. While he had no direct evidence that the HOA was behind the vandalism, the coincidence was too strong to dismiss. 2 days before the championship, Zachary drove to Redwood Range to meet Ava after her practice session. They walked together along a wooded path behind the facility, away from the crowds. Ava carried a small duffel bag of gear, her expression calm but thoughtful. "I've been training with different rifles," she said. "Carter probably has a custom rig with top-of-the-line optics. I can't match that kind of gear, but I can outshoot him if I keep my cool." Zachary glanced at the trees overhead, noticing how the breeze rustled the leaves. "I'm grateful you're doing this," he replied. "Though I'm not sure if it'll solve my problem, it might make a difference. The local press is covering the championship. If you beat Carter, maybe we can shift the narrative." Ava frowned. "I'm not looking for fame or anything, I just hate bullies, especially ones who think they can buy their way into destroying land. Let's see what happens." The day of the Redwood Championship dawned bright and clear. A crowd gathered early, some wearing casual attire, others dressed in high-end outdoor gear. Food stalls and sponsor tents lined the perimeter, local news vans parked near the entrance, cameras ready to capture the star shooter's every move. Miranda Hayes arrived in a sleek black SUV, stepping out in a tailored suit that exuded authority. She was accompanied by 2 men in business attire, presumably her legal or financial advisors, and she wasted no time mingling with other VIPs. Zachary kept a low profile, blending with the spectators. He noticed the hush that fell whenever Miranda walked by, her presence sending a wave of guarded respect or fear. Meanwhile, Carter strutted around in a branded jacket, greeting fans, smiling for the cameras, and occasionally stopping to sign autographs. He made a show of checking his rifles, showcasing them to the press, and bragging about how he'd break his previous records. Then, from a far corner, Ava slipped into the competitor area, a quiet counterpoint to Carter's showboating. While Carter was swarmed by admirers, she calmly set up her station, checking wind direction and adjusting her scope. Round 1 commenced with a short-distance pistol challenge. The roar of gunfire echoed across the range as each participant stepped to the line. Carter delivered a near-perfect set, prompting cheers. Ava approached her lane in silence. It took only moments for onlookers to notice her unerring aim as she placed shot after shot close to the bullseye. By the end of round 1, the scoreboard showed Carter in the lead, with Ava trailing by just a few points. A murmur ran through the spectators. This unknown competitor was putting up an impressive fight. Round 2 involved mid-range rifles. Carter went all out, hitting every target with lethal precision, exclaiming after each shot, "That's how it's done, ladies and gentlemen." The scoreboard soared in his favor. Then Ava's turn came. She took her time, steadying her breathing. The crack of her rifle was measured, deliberate. Each bullet found its mark. When the scoreboard updated, she matched Carter's performance exactly. Whispers turned to excitement, and the local news crew started focusing more on Ava. Miranda Hayes stood near the sponsor tent, her eyes dark with irritation. Between rounds, Zachary caught sight of Miranda admonishing a Redwood Range official, possibly insisting they check Ava's gear for unfair modifications. But the official seemed to assure her everything was by the book. The tension mounted. Spectators began to buzz about a possible upset. "Who is she?" some asked. "How can she keep up with Carter's level of skill?" The final round was the marquee event, long-distance rifle shooting at varied targets. Each competitor would have multiple shots, with different angles and distances. Carter stepped up, brandishing a high-tech custom rifle rumored to cost thousands of dollars. The hush fell as he fired his first shot, hitting the target's center ring. Applause and cheers erupted. 4 more shots followed, each nearly flawless. The scoreboard displayed a jaw-dropping total. He waved to the crowd, exuding triumph. Then Ava took the stage. She placed her rifle on the rest, inhaled deeply, and fired. The bullet struck with stunning accuracy. Another shot, another center ring. As she continued, the crowd's initial murmurs of surprise grew into a collective gasp. By her final shot, she had tied Carter's score. The scoreboard blinked. The officials conferred, verifying that both shooters were locked in a tie, One last tiebreaker shot would determine the victor. Carter removed his shooting glasses, wiping sweat from his brow, scowling as though the concept of being challenged by a newcomer was unthinkable. He placed his rifle down, signaled for a fresh target, and fired. The round penetrated just off dead center. A near-perfect shot. Applause rippled, though tension hung in the air. Was it good enough to secure the win? Ava stepped up for her tiebreaker. The range official indicated the target. She aligned her rifle, her face serene. Zachary saw a slight shift in her stance, something almost imperceptible, as though she had found a deeper level of focus. The shot rang out. Dead center bullseye. A hush fell. The scoreboard flashed. Ava Rowan, champion. Carter Flynn, runner-up. For an instant, the crowd stood stunned. Then cheers and shouts of amazement broke loose. Cameras panned to Carter's furious expression, to Ava's calm face, to Miranda Hayes' rigid posture. The atmosphere crackled with the realization that the undefeated champion had been dethroned by someone the media was now calling the unknown contender. Before Ava could even breathe, a Redwood Range official hurried over to confirm the results. Another official approached Miranda, who glowered at them as though wanting to contest the outcome. But the evidence was clear, and the referees had verified every shot. The final scoreboard was indisputable. Ava had prevailed. Reporters surged forward, asking if Ava would share her training background. She dodged them politely, focusing on clearing her firearms safely. Carter stormed off in a blaze of indignation. Miranda marched after him, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. Zachary, standing back, felt a rush of exhilaration. This was exactly the public humiliation he'd hoped would rattle the HOA. Sure enough, as soon as Miranda and Carter disappeared behind the sponsor tents, the Redwood Range staff announced a short delay before the award ceremony, citing technical difficulties. In that lull, Zachary found Ava near a water cooler, sipping from a paper cup. He gave her a grateful smile. "That was beyond anything I hoped for," he said. "You did it." She shrugged, her posture still coiled with adrenaline. "Part of me can't believe it," she admitted softly. "But I'm glad. Maybe this will serve a higher purpose." He nodded. With Carter dethroned, the local media might poke around the HOA's involvement. We'll see. Just then, an announcement crackled over the loudspeaker. "Championship participants, please return to the main stage for the final awards presentation." Ava and Zachary headed that way, weaving through the crowd. The stage was a simple setup, with a podium and a large banner. A Redwood Range official prepared to hand out trophies. Spectators gathered, cameras rolling. Yet conspicuously absent were Carter and Miranda. The official at the podium coughed, scanning a sheet of paper. "We have the results," he said, "and our champion is indeed Miss Ava Rowan, with a final tiebreaker score that edges out our longtime title holder, Carter Flynn. However, Mr. Flynn has requested a review for potential equipment violations. Until this review is complete, we cannot present the trophy or the cash prize." A murmur of confusion swept through the crowd. A few onlookers booed. The official raised his hands for silence. "I understand your frustration. Redwood Range has a responsibility to ensure fairness. We expect to conclude our review within a week. We appreciate your patience." Disappointed chatter rippled among the spectators. Some recognized the ploy, Carter's sour grapes. Others suspected the HOA was behind this. Ava kept her face neutral, though Zachary noticed the stiffness in her jaw. After the crowd began dispersing, the official approached Ava directly. "I'm sorry," he said in a low tone. "This is out of my hands. Mr. Flynn has powerful sponsors, you understand." She nodded. "Yeah, I get it. Keep me posted on your so-called review." With that, she left the stage area, Zachary in tow. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip, painting the horizon in pink and orange. A sense of anticlimax hung over them. Ava had emerged victorious, yet the official recognition was withheld. Zachary offered an encouraging smile. "They can stall, but they can't deny that final scoreboard," he said. "Everyone saw you win." Ava exhaled. "I'd rather skip the drama, but if this is how they want to play, I'll push back. Maybe a few calls to the local papers will nudge Redwood Range to do the right thing." She glanced around. Carter's probably sulking in a corner. Miranda must be furious. Indeed, Miranda was already on the move. By the next morning, an article appeared in a local newspaper, suspiciously slanted to cast doubt on Ava's performance. It cited anonymous sources claiming her rifle might have been tuned illegally or that the officials had made an error. No mention of her actual skill. The same article praised Carter Flynn's ongoing achievements and touched on the great work the HOA was doing in the community. Zachary read it and practically choked on his coffee. It was blatant propaganda. He dialed Ava, finding her equally irked. "They're spinning it," she said, "but I won't let them smear me. If Redwood Range tries to withhold the prize money, I'll threaten a lawsuit. This can't stand." Zachary agreed wholeheartedly. "Meanwhile, Miranda's stepping up her harassment against me," he added. "I found a second fence post hammered onto my property this morning. She's expanding that barrier." That afternoon, Zachary joined a small group of neighbors who had also been targeted by the HOA. Most were older folks living in modest houses near the outskirts of Briarwood, newly classified under the expanded development zone. The stories were all the same: arbitrary fees, threats, condemnation notices, and legal intimidation. They gathered at a community center hoping to form a unified resistance. Zachary took the floor, explaining how he believed the Redwood Range fiasco could help them. If Ava's rightful victory gets recognized, the press might see that the HOA's champion isn't invincible. That could open the door to highlighting your stories. We need to bring it all into the public eye. The neighbors listened, nodding in weary agreement. For too long they'd felt isolated in their struggles. Encouraged, Zachary spent the next few days collecting witness statements from each homeowner. He also documented the condition of his farmland and wetlands, carefully photographing the unauthorized fence. A local environmental group expressed interest in investigating the wetland's importance to migrating birds. All these pieces formed the beginnings of a case, but he still needed something to break the media blackout that Miranda seemed to enforce. That something he hoped would come in the form of Redwood Range finally admitting Ava's victory was legitimate. A week slipped by, and Redwood Range equipment review dragged on with no resolution. Ava finally lost patience. She contacted a sports lawyer who specialized in shooting competitions, presenting her side. The lawyer fired off a letter to Redwood Range's management, warning them that withholding her prize was legally dubious and damaging to her reputation. Under that pressure, Redwood Range capitulated, announcing that their review found no wrongdoing. Ava was officially declared champion, and the $50,000 0-cents prize would be released immediately. The public statement read, "We regret the delay, but we are pleased to confirm Ms. Rowan's remarkable performance. We wish her congratulations on this outstanding victory." Local media outlets that weren't in Miranda's pocket grabbed the story, and Ava's name trended regionally. People began calling her the unstoppable newcomer who dethroned Carter Flynn. Redwood Range promised to host a small award ceremony that weekend, presumably to manage damage control. Carter remained silent, likely fuming behind the scenes. Miranda, for her part, seemed quiet as well, though Zachary suspected she was strategizing her next move. When word reached Zachary that Ava would be handed the trophy, he asked if she would consider using some of the prize money to help the families threatened by the HOA. Before he could even finish the question, she nodded. "Of course," she said. "That was my plan all along. We need a legal defense fund, right? Let's do it." I didn't compete for personal gain. He felt an immense sense of relief and gratitude. Maybe, just maybe, they could hire an out-of-county attorney to challenge Miranda's overreach. On the day of the mini-award ceremony, Redwood Range set up a small stage with the championship trophy displayed. Ava arrived in her usual simple attire, and Zachary stood among the onlookers, which included some curious neighbors who had come for moral support. A range manager read a prepared statement praising sportsmanship. Ava stepped forward to accept the trophy, a polite but terse smile on her face. Before she could exit the stage, a hush fell as Miranda Hayes and Carter Flynn emerged from the crowd, both wearing steely expressions. Miranda cleared her throat, motioning to the range staff to let her speak. As head of the Briarwood HOA and a sponsor of this event, I congratulate Ms. Rowan, she began in a tone so tight it nearly cracked. Carter stood at her side, lips pressed into a thin line. However, I must protest the negative rumors associating this competition with baseless allegations about my organization. We have done nothing illegal or unethical. Ms. Rowan's personal affairs and those of her supporters are irrelevant to the prestige of Redwood Range. Ava kept her composure. The audience held its breath. Miranda then pivoted to face the crowd. Let me also remind those who would slander my association that we are, in fact, deeply involved in philanthropic efforts and community improvements. Speculations that the HOA engages in forceful land acquisitions are outright falsehoods. If certain individuals continue to propagate these lies, we will pursue legal remedies. Thank you, she concluded with a tight smile, stepping away. It was a thinly veiled threat, but a threat nonetheless. Zachary's blood simmered. He wanted to shout that her condemnations and fences were all too real, that the neighbors could prove it. But he forced himself to stay calm. An outburst might only give Miranda ammunition to paint him as disruptive. Instead, he waited until the ceremony ended. Then, as the crowd dispersed, he approached Ava. I'd hoped she wouldn't show her face, he said. Ava nodded in agreement. At least it's clear she's feeling the pressure. They left Redwood Range, heading to a small diner for a celebratory coffee. Ava placed the trophy on the table as a makeshift centerpiece. A few curious patrons recognized her, offering quiet congratulations. Over mugs of steaming coffee, she and Zachary strategized how best to use the prize money. They agreed to pool it with donations from neighbors to hire a specialized attorney. A friend of a friend recommended Patricia Nolan, a lawyer from the state capitol known for taking on powerful interests. That evening they made the phone call. Patricia, brisk yet courteous, listened to Zachary's summary of the HOA's tactics and asked pointed questions. She agreed to review the evidence. Within a week she came to town for a preliminary meeting. Zachary, Ava, and half a dozen nervous residents crowded into his modest living room, presenting documents, photos, and testimonies. Patricia scrolled through pages of the HOA's demands and condemnation notices, raising her eyebrows at the blatant overreach. They're classifying farmland as part of a suburban development zone, she mused. That's questionable at best, maybe more than questionable. Ava explained the Redwood Range tie-in, describing how the HOA's champion had used the platform to reinforce their brand, until her upset win changed the narrative. Patricia looked intrigued. If I can show a pattern of intimidation and conflict of interest, she said, we might have grounds to file an injunction against the HOA's expansion. It won't be easy. Miranda Hayes seems well connected, but I see a path. Buoyed by her confidence, the group pooled their resources and Patricia got to work. She filed formal complaints, sought records under the Freedom of Information Act, and reached out to environmental experts who could testify about the wetland's significance. Meanwhile, Zachary fielded calls from more neighbors wanting to join the cause. Some sent videos or photos of suspicious activity, unmarked trucks dumping gravel on property lines, or coded letters about new HOA rules. Miranda's net was wide, but so was the growing opposition. Inevitably, Miranda lashed out. One morning, Zachary discovered a fresh, official-looking sign staked near his boundary. Property condemned. Environmental hazard. He knew it had no legal standing without due process, but it sent a chill down his spine. Later, Carter showed up unannounced, flanked by two men in suits who claimed to be HOA compliance auditors. They marched around, snapping photos, muttering about code violations, ignoring Zachary's protests. You have no right to be here, he insisted. Carter smirked. Miranda's right. You're a fool to resist. She always wins. They left before he could call the sheriff. But the sheriff wouldn't have helped much anyway. Rumors said Miranda had donated generously to the department. Each day, Zachary braced himself for another shoe to drop. Patricia, however, remained steady. Let them posture, she said. We're taking this to court soon. The more they harass you, the stronger our case for injunctive relief. Just keep documenting everything. Ava supported him too, calling daily to check in and occasionally dropping by to help photograph the fence expansions or chat with the worried neighbors. Then, Patricia made a breakthrough. She discovered internal memos from the county assessor's office, showing that Miranda's HOA had manipulated boundary lines by registering them under a special green development zone that the county never fully approved. Instead, it had been pending review. But someone stamped it as approved anyway. Someone who also happened to receive large donations from a real estate firm tied to Miranda. "This is big," Patricia told Zachary and Ava one afternoon, tapping a folder with the documents. "If we can show that this entire zone was illegally declared, your farmland is safe, and the HOA can't impose their rules or expansions on you. But we'll need the judge to see it our way." News of Patricia's discovery spread through the small circle of neighbors, sparking hope. Yet each success was met by new threats. Miranda's attorneys sent letters claiming defamation, promising lawsuits if the group continued. Carter posted on social media, accusing Ava of sabotage and calling the neighbors a bunch of freeloaders. Redwood Range tried to stay neutral, refusing to take sides, but the staff privately told Ava that Carter had been asked to minimize the range's name in his rants. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived. The courtroom was cramped, with a no-nonsense judge presiding. Patricia argued that the HOA had no legal jurisdiction over Zachary's farmland due to the suspicious boundary changes, and that condemnation notices were fraudulent. Miranda's attorney countered with legal jargon, brandishing county documents that seemed to back the HOA's expanded authority. Yet, when Patricia introduced the memos showing a falsified signature and a questionable date stamp, a visible ripple went through the crowd. Even the judge's brow furrowed in concern. Miranda, seated beside her attorney, maintained her composure, though her tightened jaw signaled alarm. Carter was there too, arms folded, glaring at Ava whenever he got the chance. After hours of back and forth, the judge announced he would need time to review the evidence. A temporary freeze on HOA enforcement actions was put in place, meaning no more fences or condemnation notices until the case was resolved. It was a small but crucial victory. Walking out of the courthouse, Zachary let out a shaky breath. Ava gave him a reassuring smile. "We're getting somewhere," she said. Patricia nodded. "This is only step one, but we've got momentum." The neighbors who attended the hearing seemed heartened. Miranda left in a rush, refusing to answer reporters' questions. The next few weeks brought a relative calm. The HOA halted new aggressions, presumably not wanting to violate the judge's order. Meanwhile, Patricia dug deeper, requesting more records. The local media, once hesitant, started covering the case, framing it as David versus Goliath, with Zachary and the farmland owners pitted against Miranda's powerhouse HOA. Some articles highlighted how the Redwood Range champion had switched from being an asset to a liability. Carter's complaints about losing seemed petty, and the once shiny image of the HOA eroded. For Ava's part, she continued to practice shooting, not to prove anything now, but because it was her passion and a way to stay centered. A sports magazine reached out for an interview, praising her for dethroning Carter. She only agreed on condition that she could mention the farmland dispute and Miranda's overreach. "If you're going to publish anything about me," she told the reporter, "include the bigger story." The final piece did exactly that, shining a critical light on the HOA's questionable expansions. As the date of the final hearing approached, tensions rose again. Miranda filed a countersuit alleging that Zachary's farmland caused pollution runoff into the community's water supply, an absurd claim with no evidence. Patricia dismissed it as a desperation move. Carter was spotted in town harassing a local cafe owner who'd put up a sign supporting Zachary. A few nights later, that cafe's window was smashed. No witnesses, no proof. The police did little. But the bigger stage was the courtroom. On the final day of the hearing, the judge reviewed testimonies from environmental experts, local residents, and even Redwood Range staff who verified that the HOA seemed to use intimidation. Patricia laid out a thorough argument. The farmland was never lawfully annexed into the HOA zone, the condemnation notices were baseless, and the wetlands were protected by older county codes that predated Miranda's expansion. Miranda's attorney tried to argue that everything was above board, but they offered no credible counter for the falsified signature or the timeline anomalies Patricia uncovered. At last, the judge made his ruling. The farmland and by extension the wetlands were not under the HOA's jurisdiction. All condemnation notices were voided. Any attempt by the HOA to impose fees or forcibly buy the land was illegal. Miranda sat in stunned silence as the judge sternly reprimanded her for overstepping, hinting that the county might investigate further for fraud. Carter, fuming, left before the session was even adjourned. Tears erupted in the hallway, neighbors hugged each other, and some had tears in their eyes. Zachary stood there, almost numb with relief, until Ava placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she said. "Or we did it. Together." He laughed, a weight lifting from his chest. "We owe you so much. If you hadn't won that competition, I'm not sure we would have gotten enough attention to pull this off." She waved him off. "Don't diminish your own efforts. But, yeah, I guess it all started with a bullet hitting a bullseye that was never supposed to be threatened." Days later, in a celebratory gathering at the farmland near the wetlands, neighbors strolled freely among the grasses and reeds, admiring the wildlife that thrived there. A local paper snapped photos of the group, featuring Ava holding her championship trophy in front of Zachary's barn. A barn now free of hateful graffiti or condemning signs. Miranda was nowhere to be seen. Rumors had it she was busy trying to keep her seat on the HOA board and fight off an internal revolt among members who didn't appreciate the negative publicity. Somewhere on the horizon, Carter still fumed, occasionally posting rants online. But the public no longer took him seriously. Redwood Range moved on, focusing on next year's events, quietly distancing themselves from the controversy. The farmland, saved from bulldozers, remained a testament to resilience. Ava, who had begun the story as a simple woman, overlooked at a shooting range, now stood as a symbol of quiet defiance, a person whose skill and integrity tore down a champion's arrogance and shattered the illusions of an all-powerful HOA. Zachary walked with Ava down a narrow path by the wetlands, their footsteps rustling the tall grass. "Funny how life twists, isn't it?" he mused. "I was looking for a miracle, and I found it at a shooting range." Ava brushed a strand of hair from her face, taking in the amber light of the late afternoon. "Maybe it wasn't so much a miracle," she replied. "Just the right people coming together with enough determination. Still, I'm glad you found me." He paused by the water's edge. "Well, if there's ever another unscrupulous HOA, I know who to call." She chuckled, stooping to watch a frog leap into the pond. "I don't exactly make a living saving farmland, but I can't stand bullies, so if you ever need a sharpshooter, you know where I'll be." They continued in companionable silence for a few moments. The birds flitted across the water, and the fading sun streaked the sky with pink and gold. It was a fitting image for the triumph they'd just lived through. A reminder that even under the shadow of greed, a single unwavering shot could change everything. And so it was that on those quiet acres, surrounded by the gentle hum of crickets and the distant call of geese, Zachary Pierce and Ava Rowan brought to a close the final chapter of a battle that had once seemed impossible to win. Yet win it they did, proving to all of Briarwood that sometimes the unstoppable champion is just waiting to be stopped by the unassuming person no one saw coming. And that farmland, when defended with conviction, can endure against even the most formidable foe.